Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's device management interface Brigade call. As usual, the call is recorded, so please be mindful of whatever you say that is allowed and it's respectful of others. Today we have a set of very good set of topics, and we basically started. I want to start with the fact that we created the repo for the device management interface. There's this repo. For now, there is just very few files in there, code of conduct and the README. The README is just very bland set of things. There's actually a typo I need to fix. And if anybody is interested to contribute to this, the steps are usually as usual, so Gerrit. More important than that, we actually, Amit, thanks a lot for that, contributed the proto files so that we discussed last time. So I have some comments, some fairly minor comments. Girish has some other comments, but I want to make sure to give the opportunity to everybody to express their comments today while we are on the same call. So first of all, Amit, do you have anything about this? Anything that you want to comment on my stuff or Girish's?
No, I have not yet worked on this comment, so I'll review them.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks for submitting them. I want to make sure that
I do.
Yes.
I do, if you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, sure.
We do already have a functionality that implements these functions. It is called the Redfish importer. Why are we coming up with yet another interface?
So this was the decision that was taken by the TST and was discussed extensively in many meetings. There are a set of reasons that we have chosen this API. It is based on two set of Yang models and that are standard. It's an ITF standard.
I do understand. I'm not asking that question. I'm asking the question on, we already have an interface. It is functional. It's available. The repository exists. It's been integrated everywhere. And yet we are coming up with another interface. Why? It does exactly the same thing.
Taskin, this has been discussed. I'm sorry. I don't want to go over topics that have been discussed yet again and again and again.
Do you mind describing to me? Just summarize, just for my benefit.
Well, we decided that gRPC was a better option than REST.
Why?
The set of protobuf describing the interface was better than having it described in a set of proprietary, not proprietary, but not well-known in the networking industry set of files that the DMTF has. Proto is a well-known thing. Everybody uses it. It allows for streaming in gRPC, which is not supplied by REST. And it's also...
But not you're talking about, no, we're not talking about, if you know anything about the infrastructure of the Volta environment, the APIs that you'll talk to device manager or the Redfish importer it's just for input. The output, which you're talking about streaming, for example, it goes through Kafka. So calling from the point of REST or gRPC doesn't make any difference. At the end of the day, they are just HTTP interfaces that says, do this, but there's no data going back up as far as the gRPC is concerned or the REST is concerned. There's no data push up from those interfaces. Everything goes through Kafka. So I feel like we're reinventing the wheel for no apparent technical reason anyways.
Well, we are using an existing standard. So this is what the BBF, which is exactly the broadband forum, which is the body for the stuff we're working on, the stuff for
But
access.
this has already been implemented. That's what I'm saying. I mean, there's got to be a technical reason. We have another interface we want to use is good idea if there's a technical reason. Otherwise, we're reinventing the wheel.
It's simpler, faster,
What?
and
How is it simpler? It's I'm sorry, guys. We already have the interface. It's working. It's available, and there is no faster argument can be made on this case. It's HTTP versus HTTP. The data coming in. I do agree with the fact that gRPC is going to be faster if you're pushing out protobuffers which are basically binary. gRPC is going to give you definitely better performance if you're reading out of data. But the data that's read in this case is 0. Everything goes back to Kafka. So there's technically no reason. Right? You just like.
So, hi, Tuscan. So, yeah, when you say everything goes back to Kafka, it's the matrices and the events that are exported out through Kafka. But when you talk about the inventory, that is through this interface. It's not through the Kafka. Or even if you are looking for
so you want to change that as well?
Yeah, and even if you're looking for matrices which are on demand and not periodic matrices, they would be on this interface and not through Kafka.
You misunderstood how the functionality works, dude. Even reading the data goes back to Kafka.
Sorry?
And we argued with this thing like extensively, as we've just said a minute ago. Even when you're reading the what you call inventory, everything goes back to Kafka, and we didn't understand why it was the way, because we were told everything goes back to Kafka. So you're really literally reading 0 data from this interface.
No, sorry, maybe I
If you guys are
so originally everything went back to Kafka because we were trying to keep the interface async. The idea being you send messages and then you get responses, and therefore you don't have a wait, and that's why the original.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it was written that way. Why the new interface? This was discussed. The general idea was that Redfish was defined around a certain set of devices, and the networking industry used a different set of devices, which they felt that the RFC interface had thank you. Had a broader scope of devices that supported it.
That is absolutely untrue, but David.
That's okay. That was kind of the reasoning. Therefore, by providing this RC-based interface, the idea would be that it would encompass essentially both the devices that support Redfish today as well as devices that don't. And therefore, it made sense to use that as the public abstraction.
David, I'm sorry. That really doesn't hold a level of water in it.
Okay, that's justification. That's a justification for it. Let's take let's take it offline. Let's talk offline. Let's bring Saurabh in.
I'm really concerned about the way we're doing. I don't mind implementing the gRPC on the device manager. Of course, however, you're talking devices is independent. But
the
path is very interesting right now.
Pardon?
The path we are taking is very interesting right now.
What is it? The curse people get, may your life be interesting.
Well, it's I think even worse than that, but I don't know.
Let's take it offline. Let's bring Saurabh in discussion.
I mean, if I may intervene, the discussion was already extensively done. I don't think we need another discussion. This, as you perfectly said, David, it's also because Redfish was thought to be overly complicated to be selected as the one API that the device management needs to expose towards the northbound. Meaning that there are other interfaces, such as a netconf Yang-based, especially Yang-based interfaces, that very difficultly adhere to redfish, meaning that mapping them to redfish would be very complicated because there needs to be a lot of translation. So there was an extensive look by Deutsche Telekom and Radisys, and Amit can speak to this, on what is the industry standard in the broadband networks for management. And that was clearly defined as RFC 8348 plus the BBF WT 383, which describes something on top of the RFC for software management and software approach. So having said all of this, this is the reasoning why redfish was not chosen as the one thing.
I don't think that I'm going to make the decision, or we can make the distinction. Hey, gRPC is simpler than redfish. They are both HTTP based. We know that, right? And given the fact that the data is being pushed, or the questions are being sent, requests are being sent through an HTTP request, yes, gRPC limits the extent of the HTTP greatly. Doesn't make any difference. If you guys are talking about, yes, we'd like to be able to go ahead and read the data from the same interface as well, where gRPC is clearly more efficient on retrieving big chunks of data or frequent data, I'll buy it totally. So are we saying that we are going to abandon using Kafka also at a certain level so that we can data as well, or are we still going to be going and pushing it to Kafka? Because if we are still pushing it to Kafka, gRPC more efficient doesn't make sense.
There are two sets of things, as Amit was saying before. There are events that can or cannot be pushed to Kafka. There are metrics that can or cannot be pushed to Kafka in a very high level stream. But there are also collection of data about the hardware that is not going to go through Kafka.
Again, so we are changing that as well.
Yes. So if you look at the models that we provide here in the patch that I was showing before, and maybe Amit can talk more about this. But if you look at, for example, the hardware management. So this has physical inventory and component information. Those are not going to go through Kafka.
It is right now going through that way. So if you want to go ahead and change that as well, it's fine.
And also the set is not going to go through Kafka. Plus, really some of the reasoning is that all these protofiles, as far as I understand, and please Amit, correct me if I'm wrong, this is all that is needed. Because it exactly implements that 8348 RFC, and that is it. There's nothing else in there. Am I correct, Amit?
Yeah.
So what we are saying is that with 6 files, we're basically achieving our goal with a well-known backing system that we know with gRPC. It provides a fast approach, and it's also something that can be easily mapped to many implementations toward the device, being it redfish, being it netconf and yang models, which might more or less adhere to these, which can be proprietary, can be public, can be whatever. This was the reasoning why we went ahead and did this. And it was also because there was a clear requirement from us, a service provider. I did not come up with this. It was not my decision. It was a clear ask from one of the 2 key service providers that are pushing this project, which is Deutsche Telekom. So
that's clear. That's clear. Thank you for clarification, though. I appreciate it for taking the time. Does this also fall under the new licensing scheme that's being pushed by I'm assuming Deutsche Telekom?
There is no discussion of that yet.
Okay.
Okay. So glad we clarified that. Does anybody have any comments? I hope you guys took a look at the protos and if they provide the right number of attributes and elements and calls that you would expect. Okay. Is that a no, or that you guys did not take a look at, or is that yes, we did and we have no comments?
For me, it's personally, I didn't get a chance. Sorry.
That's fine. I mean, the review is up and it's going to stay up until we fix these, and we're going to make sure that everybody takes a look at it. So just everybody, please take a look at this review. I put it in the agenda, which is here. Just go in, take a look, and please put there any comments on the protos. And if you don't have any comments on the protos, but you would like to have yet another interface, yet another call that you would like to be made, or you think it's missing, please create a Jira ticket that we can discuss on top of it. Make sense?
Yeah, perhaps I have one question right now. This is Holger speaking, if it's okay.
Go ahead, Holger. Yes.
Yeah, I noticed that for the software update interface, there is no, I mean, there are no indications telling you that the software update happened or did not happen, if it failed or something. So it looks like you always have to poll the state of the software update. Did I get this right, or am I wrong here?
Amit, do you want to comment?
Yeah, so it returns, so if you look at the APIs there, it returns a stream with the image status. So you should get the current status on that.
Okay, I'm sorry. Perhaps I looked at an older version. Did you change this? Okay. I see this now, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So basically, as I understand it, you do this call and you spawn a function, or somebody listens on the return. And eventually, you should get a return back. If you don't, you should have a timeout. You should have a way of saying something went wrong. And then you can either call a get to understand something, or you can call just revert to standby and saying, I don't want to deal with this. Just go back to whatever you had before I asked you anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah. This is totally fine for me. I'm sorry, but the version I had didn't have any streams in it. So I guess that was an older version.
Yeah, that's something that I want to make sure of, that when we work on the work out the upstream, which is as of right now this patch, and eventually it will be the code that will go in here.
Yeah, so the protos that are uploaded for review, they are the latest and greatest that we've been working on.
These ones, yes, yeah. Okay, perfect. Any other questions or comments that we might want to clarify?
Looking at the APIs, which I just saw a second ago, so I don't know a lot about this, but how do we provide authentication for the users, or do we even have concept of users? Yeah,
so right now that aspect is not yet covered. So maybe we do that in the next version of the specification.
Okay, so if somebody comes and says, okay, I want you to reboot, which actually there's no API for it, do we authenticate?
So So for specifically this topic, right, reboot and management of ports, the current thought is that this will still be carried out through Volta, because we don't want an overlap of functions which could be done by both these paths, right? So currently Volta supports reboot of the device as well as enable, disable of the ports of the device.
That
Right?
may not necessarily mean the right thing, right? For example, if you look at the workflow from Dutch Telecom, they are going to be saying, I have two different partitions. I want you to reboot from this partition or that partition. You're going to support that, right? So how are you going to support it if somebody comes and says, reboot this device, and you don't know if that user is authorized or not?
Yeah, but that is not really, okay, underlying it's a reboot that is happening, right? But it is not looked at like a pure reboot, right? Generally when you reboot, it should come back from the same partition. It should just come back with the same image. So here what you are trying to say is that, okay, you boot the system from a separate partition with the idea that you really want to change the software.
That's what,
right?
that's
So
what
in that case,
right.
Yeah, so in that case, right, so here you can see the last API which says revert to the standby image. So if you exercise this, right, what will happen is, yes, it will reboot the system, but it will go to the standby image. So in this case, yes, the reboot will happen, but through the standby image. But if you're talking about the normal reboot, which is like coming back from the same image, right, that is still being done by Volta. So that is not part of image or software management, right? That is more of an operational thing of the device.
But who cares? You have an interface and somebody is saying you reboot, and you really don't know who's saying it. You're just going to blindly do it. I'm asking, how do you support the?
gRPC does provide a capability for credentials as well as certificates to authenticate a client.
Obviously.
Yeah.
But we don't have that interface right now.
But that is not needed because gRPC itself supports it, meaning it's end-to-end secured by a certificate that is shared between the client and the server.
No, it's HTTPS, dude. That's HTTPS. I think what I'm trying to get at is as long as I think you guys are saying there's an HTTPS certificate there, if somebody tells us to reboot, we're going to reboot.
But this interface is not implemented on a device, right? So we're not talking about accessing a device and using that interface to reboot it, but you have to access the device manager which run in your cloud.
Maybe I'm not asking that question. If this interface is going to support rebooting from the secondary partition, this interface is going to support rebooting the machine. Otherwise, maybe what you're saying is.
So Taskin, I think what you are referring to is more like access privileges on the device, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is somebody.
Yes, so that's what I was trying to say, that the current version of the specification does not address that, right? So and we plan to do that in the next version of the specification. Yeah.
So should we add that APIs for account management kind of APIs?
Yeah, we could. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
You could create JIRAs for that. Yeah.
More questions. I'll have more questions on the APIs. I'm pretty sure I'll understand more. Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else? Okay, I noted the two elements here. We can easily create account management and access privileges.
Right. Do we access privileges with access privileges? Access privileges. I mean, do we envision the fact that there's going to be users that reads the data only, and they have read-only access to the system, versus there will be accounts where they are going to be able to go ahead and change the system settings as well. A typical scenario is Deutsche Telekom may have a dashboard where the dashboard is updated with the status, and they only can do the what do you call view of the system, get the alerts and view of the system. However, if they are going to go ahead and make changes in the system, they are going to have a special account where these things can be handled separately. Maybe they have read-write access.
That makes sense. That's a notable thing, but that's totally fine by me. I think it's a valid use case. It's also yeah.
Okay. Additional thing, do we even consider about logging services?
Loading services? What do you mean?
Logging.
Oh, locking.
Yeah.
Locking and unlocking it, of set and get APIs.
No, log. I mean, I want to be able to debug things, so I want to enable certain logs to be generated or not to be generated.
So,
Or from the target.
so part of that is done through Volta for the OpenOLT, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Which logs do you mean here? The one from the device manager, the one from I don't know, kernel?
The one from devices themselves. I mean, we do control the functionality from the device OLTs. We do control the collection of data from, I don't know, adapters, etc. So the control of logs from the software under our control is controlled by Volta. But do we want to have logs also from the devices that we don't have, like software? For example, if an ONU is in picture or a storage device is in picture, do we want to go ahead and say, hey, there's something going on, I want to log it, except that...
So you bring up a good point. This API is really especially only meant for the OLT and the information about it. I don't know about exactly the ONU. We can definitely get some information in some events through the OLT out of the ONUs, but I mean, maybe you can clarify this. But it's specifically meant for the OLT and the PON access. It's not meant for the servers nor even aggregation switches.
Yeah, that goes against a little bit of what we just discussed earlier. We want this API because it's being used by the networking devices and the networking industry, except that all the support is OLT, doesn't jive well. Maybe we may want to go ahead and put additional API that says I want to do debugging of my system instead of just OLT. That would enable collection of data, collection of logs from the target devices if they choose to.
When we mentioned the fact that the networking industry is not really big into Redfish, the discussion was really about the OLT and the ONU. The aggregation switches are their own beast, and we at ONF have our own solution with Stratum and OpenConfig for those. So
I understand.
Let's leave that aside for a bit. Mm-hmm. This API is really for the OLT and whatever stands in front of it. So some events from ONU and things like that. I agree that the logs are an important part. Amit, did you guys consider any of this, or do you think it's going to be done all through Volta, or do you think it's going to be done through something else?
Yeah, so we did not consider logging as part of this, but I think this is a good topic and we should evaluate this. Should logging the native logs from the device, right? So there could be logs which could be coming because of the hardware components, right? And which is not accessible through, or which is not relevant for the control plane. right? So what do we do about it? Definitely there is a need for management of those logs, right? And should this be the interface to do that? Or so I think, yeah, we first need to collect the requirements, right? And then see, okay, if this interface is the right place to have that implemented or addressed as well.
There's no other interface if you're going to be managing the devices. Software under our control doesn't definitely need login enabled through this, because Volta already has it. Seba environment has it anyways. But for the devices that we don't control, or they are not under our software control, we have no control on the implementation. We may want to go ahead and be able to debug certain events, at this failure, etc. So we may want to go ahead and have an API that says enable logging specifically for this device. That will enable additional.
Yeah, agreed, Taskin. But the thought that I had was that we should get the requirements, right, from someone who plans to use it, and then address it accordingly. Right? Because given the amount of resources we have and the timelines that we have, we don't want to be doing things which no one is planning to use it right away. Yes, maybe in the future, but we want to prioritize on things that are needed first, right? So that's why I said that maybe in the next versions of the specification or this interface, we could have more things, but we need to get those requirements.
Okay. There's only one customer that's planning to use this software stack at all. Given. So unfortunately, DT is not here. Turkish Telecom is on 1.7. I don't know when they're going to be switching to this 2.x. So we'll ask DT if they are going to be doing any debugging on their other devices, or if they are interested in collecting data from other devices. If they come back and say no, that's the
But in any case, this interface is not really dependent on Volta 1.7 or 2.x, right? So
no,
if you're using Volta 1.7, you could still use this.
Nobody's going to use it other than Turkish Telecom. Other than Dutch Telecom. Turkish Telecom is still on 1.7. Whenever they switch, they may use it. If they switch.
But I do agree with Amit.
No, that's not correct. Actually, I should correct that. We are just aligned with Volta 2.3, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I thought you guys are on 1.7. You were thinking about going to 2.3.
No, I am repeatedly correcting you on this, but we are on Volta 2.x.
Okay. So since you're here and Turk Telecom is doing this, are you guys going to be using the system to collect data from the other devices, or is it just going to be OLT only?
Actually, we discussed this extensively through Brigade or so. The collection of logs and filtering of the logs related to Volta, etc., is still under discussion, I think. It is also discussed, I believe, in MVP 2.0 meetings. So it's not concluded yet, as far as I understand, because Turkish Telecom and Deutsche Telekom, as far as I know, don't decide what kind of logging details they need from the OLT. So I don't know if the logging interface can be put here or another place. We are just, I agree that we should define the requirements from the operators, for example. I don't know.
Okay. Aren't you the operator? I thought you.
I am. Yeah, I'm Netsia and Argela, somewhat representing the Turkish Telecom side, maybe.
But this brings up a good point.
So Cemil is not here, so I can. Cemil is not here, so I can talk on behalf of him somewhat. So yeah.
So, but this brings up a good point, that this is definitely a requirement that needs to be discussed. And given the fact that it overlaps between existing Volta components, such as the OpenOLT agent on the box, for example, and non-managed Volta components, such as power, fans, LEDs, and all the things that we are discussing here, it might be worth to be brought to the Volta TST, where we can decide who deals with what after having gathered the requirements from the operator. Does that make sense?
It does, it does.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, let me take a note of that, and I'll make sure that to bring it up to add it to the next agenda, or at least make sure of aware that we need to talk about this and let him decide whenever the best TST is. And I know that in the TST, the lead team of the TST includes people from Turk Telekom and Deutsche Telekom, so they can also discuss it among themselves and then come up with a proposal to the TST. But this gives me the opportunity to remind everybody how this interface wants to deal with stuff that is not done to Volta. Like, for example, alarms of certain types, especially like loss of signal and things like that. Those are handled by Volta because they impact the control plane. So things like that are going to go to the Volta stack, and we're not going to, they might be signaled also here, but the handling of them will be done to the Volta stack. And that has to be clear. This interface is for things that are not related to the data plane.
So may I ask something here?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, for example, we are asked about alarms regarding the removal of the transceiver, such as we know that BAL or agent only perceives as a loss of signal. So, but they want to know more details about the removal of the transceiver or breaking of the transceiver as in hardware level. So it's the subject of this interface, right? To give that alarm.
So you bring up a good point. Yes, from a control plane perspective, the removal of the transceiver is a loss of signal for every ONU under that PON tree. Whatever, and that is what goes currently today. It's already implemented through Volta. More information, such as the make and model of the transceiver that we lost and other type of things, could be achieved through this interface. Does that go with what the TST thinks? I'm looking at Amit, I'm looking at David. Is that a correct assessment?
Unfortunately, David wasn't looking.
Yeah, Andrea, that's my understanding as well, and that's what we have tried to already put in the protos.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, David, to just recap what we were saying was that, for example, a transceiver alarms. Let's talk that a removal of a transceiver generates a loss of signal, and that is clearly going through Volta, and it disables the ports and everything all up the stack. But there might be also other information, such as oh, it's still in there, but it's actually broken. Or we're still seeing like things like that that are really about the hardware, the transceiver hardware, and that might go through this interface. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that's my understanding.
We cannot differentiate the removal of transceiver from the removal of the cable, you know. So plugging out the cable and removing the transceiver or breaking of the transceiver is the same in terms of Volta's perception.
In terms of Volta perception, but not in terms of this interface, the device management.
Yeah,
interface.
sure.
The idea being that I think Volta is meant kind of at that control interface, and so it, if it's not going to react differently to those two events, it doesn't see the difference.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? I think these are very good points. I'll make sure to capture these in some Jira tickets that can then be expanded and talked about and revisited whenever needed. Okay. Anything else on this point before we go forward with? Manuel is not really here, but I'll speak to it and hear everybody's opinion. Okay, then I'll go. So the thing is that for the first, let's say, implementation of this on whatever device, this was the list that Manuel and Deutsche Telekom came up with. And I want to make sure that everybody takes a look at it and either says this is fine or says I want more information for the first implementation. I think this is all pretty reasonable stuff and it's not over the top, meaning that it does not require that to implement even the whole very minimal API that we have. So for the events, it's like failure of the fan, of the power supply, and just going over a temperature threshold. That's really it.
These are already, sorry, these are already events that we support. So I don't think that there's an issue.
Okay, perfect, that's great. And from a metric perspective, we want to track the current state of the core, the usage percentage of the CPU. It's basically this usage and temperature for CPU, disk, and RAM, the power supply watt usage, this is, and the fan speed. That's it from a metrics perspective. Is that
mostly the things that we already correct, but I don't think that our devices do have a distinction for RAM temperatures. We don't read RAM.
It's a good point.
We don't even have hardware for supporting RAM temperatures.
Good point.
And I guess the same is for disk temperature.
Yeah, and same goes with the disk temperature. I mean, this requires hardware changes from our side. I don't know if Atran, maybe Atran does support, that's why they put them in here.
Holger, do you guys support this? Okay, I guess.
Sorry, I was muted. No, we don't support everything. No, we don't support CPU core temperature, disk temperature, RAM temperature.
Yeah.
And
so when you say temperature, what is is just like a chassis temperature?
No, not it doesn't say chassis temperature. It's very specific. It says the CPU's temperature, which requires the sensor to read the specifically for CPU. RAM temperature, it is where the RAM chips are.
Yeah, no. Okay, I was asking, I was expecting any of your devices to have a temperature shutoff threshold.
Yeah, those are.
Yeah, sure, but it's not CPU temperature. It's somewhere, I don't know.
It's on the board. It's one sensor.
Yeah, somewhere.
Okay, we can say board temperature.
It's a device temperature. So you should say device temperature. Yeah. But if a vendor supports disk temperature separate from RAM temperature, separate from CPU temperature, CPU core temperature, and that requires hardware change for us anyways.
Okay, but I mean, the one thing is that if something is not supported out of this API, you can just say it's unsupported.
Yeah.
So what I think we can do is actually shave off these specific ones for the first implementation and just say device temperature. I think that is fine enough. Amit, Burak, do you agree?
Could you please repeat the question? I'm outside.
I was just asking if instead of going for 3 different temperatures for disk, CPU, and RAM, we could just, for the first implementation, go for the general device temperature that we know every type of device supports.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
I
should
think
ask
that's
that.
fine.
Okay, good. That's perfect.
The other
But
question is also, some of these parameters are not going to be collectible from BMC. Does Dutch Telecom not want to support BMC anymore? Or is it we are going to go with the same way? If one function is not supported, we'll just return not supported. Because
I thought that was the way we talked about this before. If there's not a value supported, it just supports returns, not some indication it's not supported.
right. I mean, BMC is not going to be able to go and check how much the CPU is being used, or RAM usage, or power supply usage. It's not going to work.
okay. Okay, that works for me. So I guess we basically reduced it to disk usage, RAM usage, CPU usage, which I expect everybody supports, power supply, fan speed, and device temperature. Is that right assessment? Is there anything else that is not currently supported, given the BMC pending thing?
Okay.
I'm not sure about power supply usage as well, so but I have to check. I don't know these by heart, so I'm sorry.
Actually, this brings up the previous conversation back to the picture. It doesn't look like, based on this API, it doesn't look like the BMC is going to be used by what do you call Dutch Telecom, because one of their requirements was originally to be able to control and reboot the machine if the OLT side, the x86 side, is dead. But if there's no API to control the reboot from the BMC side, well, there's no BMC then. It makes the BMC like not necessary. We should check with the Dutch Telecom to see if they are going to use BMC. Burhan, I'm Burak, sorry. You guys were talking about using BMC, not using BMC. There was some discussion within the Turk Telecom. Do you guys envision, or have you made a decision on if BMC is going to be a supported feature on the device?
Actually, yeah, on that level, no decision is made yet because we are talking about requirements here. So whether we get that information from the BNC or somewhere else is not relevant right now. But we are discussing whether it will be collected directly through the machines. For example, the state of the power supply units temperatures. You know, we use double power supply units, and there are certain thresholds, and the output of ONLP dump, for example, says all those information. So writing simple scripts also get that information, but we need some APIs, etc. So we are discussing such kind of things. So whether this information will come from BMC or an API, etc. So it's not currently relevant, but we are discussing continuously on that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the finalization of the API will require at least input from you guys to say, yes, BMC is going to be used. The argument that was made originally by Dutch Telecom was that if the device is not reachable through OLT's software stack, well, they still want like to be able to go then remotely reboot the machine. And this device interface was the what you call medium for it, going through BMC.
So it should also be accessible through inline, right?
Right.
So that kind of things.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe we should go ahead and get some feedback from Dutch Telecom as well. Do we want to reboot the machine through BMC?
So maybe one of the thoughts I have is that, as Burak said, many of these things can be achieved at runtime if the x86 is up. And maybe that's what we want. and maybe we keep BMC just for reboot. Maybe we don't need to get these parameters out of BMC, because we use BMC in a very specific state where some of these parameters don't even or not even relevant if you can't get to the machine. Am I making myself clear?
They were originally, I don't know what they are thinking now, but they were originally thinking about using both ways as much as possible, so that, for example, if the machine is shut down and x86 is not what they call readable, they wanted to be able to go and get to the chassis temperature, so that they can say, yes, the temperature is too high, that's why the machine is not rebooting. I mean, they wanted to be able to have a backup for managing their devices, not just being able to reboot. But after all, if you have the BMC and reboot and the chassis temperature is too high, so the machine cannot be rebooted, having a BMC doesn't make much of a difference there. You still cannot reboot the machine, and you really don't know why. And I understand what you call their reason for that one. Of course, some functionality is not going to maybe make sense, like CPU percentage, how much CPU you use. I mean, does it really make any difference if the what do you call BMC is up or right, or BMC can retrieve that data? But hey, is my power supply still plugged in? Was a question that they were trying to get from BMC as well. But as it is today, the API seem to be really focusing on just the OLT and nothing else, and it's on x86. Again, it comes back from the operators. If Turk Telecom and DT are still discussing if they are going to have these devices, secondary, I mean, maybe in their first releases they don't care. Maybe they don't have BMC on the devices. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, we can double check with them. It's neither up to me nor to you, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's the question.
Requirement. But I'm glad we went through this list. I think these are perfectly fine. And I'll make sure Manuel takes a look at them. Burak, can you also make sure that these cover what Turk Telecom would like to see as a first implementation of this API?
Sure, I will forward this to Jimmy. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot. That would be great. Perfect. Okay, so we're right basically at the top of the hour. There was one more topic, which was the discussion around the device manager and the plans for the gRPC integration from EdgeCore and Taskin in particular. But I think, and Taskin, please correct me if I'm wrong, that some more thought has to be given after the discussion today to that, and we can maybe take that offline and come up with a better discussion for next week. Does that hold true?
Well, I don't know. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think the device managers can support gRPC or HTTP. I don't think it makes a big difference. Actually, it doesn't make any difference at all in my mind. gRPC, however, it looks like the data path, data flow is going to be different. We should discuss how that data if the documentation includes it, perfectly reasonable. I can read that as well.
Okay, I think we can maybe clarify that on the documentation. I take an action item to do that. Maybe with Amit together we can clarify this and how it's the expected interaction with this API to happen and what values go where. And then that could be a basis for discussion next week. Would that make sense?
Sure.
Okay, perfect. Okay, it's great. It was a great discussion. I enjoyed the different things that we came up with as of today. So before I end up, please do get the chance to, whenever you have time, take a look at the protos that are in that Gerrit code review. There might be some slight changes because I'm working on a make file and a set of tests that to make sure the syntax is right and everything. and I'll push them up. So as soon as those are up, I'll ask Amit to make sure that the proto passed. So you might see small changes here and there to get that done. And those make files is the exact same one as the one we use in the Volta protos, so we keep it nice and clean. So that's one of the next steps. But please do make sure that you take a look there. And as we have done today with the access privilege, the account management, the native logs, the alarms for the transceiver removal and stuff like that, whatever is not clear, whatever is missing, you just come up with it, and we're going to take it next week. Okay? Well then, thanks everybody, and I'll give you 1 minute back.
Awesome.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.